Okay. Good evening. Welcome to DePauw University. I'm Miranda Spivack. I'm the Pulliam Visiting Professor of Journalism here at DePauw. And with me tonight, as you know, are Senator Richard Lugar over here. And Congressman Lee Hamilton here. Senator Lugar is head of the Lugar Center now, but this is after a very distinguished career in the US Senate from Indiana, where among his many, many accomplishments, he helped to negotiate the non-Lugar legislation, which led to a decrease in chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons in the Soviet Union. He is a graduate of Denison University. I know we won't hold that against him here. And he was Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. He is also the former mayor of Indianapolis. He was on the Indianapolis School Board. He has a long and very storied career in public service. Representative Hamilton, as you may know, is a graduate of DePauw University, class. He was class of 1952, and in earlier conversations today, he told us that when he graduated from here, he had no idea what he was going to do. So those of you students in the audience who are still a little concerned about where your next life is going to come from, don't worry about it. This man is a great example of what you can grow up to be. He eventually went to law school. And he practiced law in Columbus, Indiana, which, as many of you know, is a very progressive community. And then he got bored, he said, with the practice of law. I can't imagine. And I should also say, though, that he is a real Hoosier basketball guy. He was a big basketball star in high school and at DePauw University. So thank you both for being here. Congressman Hamilton, I should also mention, was head of the House Select Committee on Intelligence for many years. And if the name Devin Nunes means anything to you now, that's the guy who has succeeded him in the job. So perhaps we'll talk about some of that today. I think there's a big chasm there. Before we get into the guts of this conversation, I want to explain how our evening is going to unfold. Both lawmakers will make brief statements about the topic of tonight, which is how to restore civility in politics and public discourse in the United States and beyond. And then we will have sort of a conversation in which I will ask questions, and believe me, these guys are pros. They know how to, they know what they want to talk about, and so I hope to be more of a bystander, actually, than a moderator, but we'll see how that goes. And then we'll open it up to audience questions. So I hope you all will have some good questions and start thinking about them now so that when we move to that phase, we'll be ready to go. Anyway, thank you very much. I think the question that I am most interested in as a journalist and a longtime observer of American politics is that it seems to me that incivility has become the new normal in the United States. I think it has a history that precedes our present president, but I think it has kind of risen to a new low, actually. How about that? And what's the cause of this behavior? There are a lot of reasons, I think, but many of them say, there are many polls, and of course I'm not sure how much I believe in polls anymore either, but there are a lot of polls that say that both politicians, the media, the rise of social media, where people can hide behind anonymous statements and say really vicious things, and and you even see that among young people who don't use the phone anymore. I mean, it's all texting and sort of remote conversations, which make it easier actually to be rude, I think. Anyway, that's perhaps one of the causes. I think we cannot talk about incivility without talking about our current president, whose tweets, I think, I'm not going to say anything that will surprise many of you, but a lot of the tweets actually resemble, I think, schoolyard bullying. And I say that very seriously. So the question is, what's the solution to this problem? Frank Bruni, who's a columnist in the New York Times, perhaps you read his work, he says being furious is not going to do anything. You know, you may be appalled by some of the level of discourse, but just being angry about it isn't going to solve it. So I hope tonight we will perhaps discuss some of the roots of the problems and figure out some of these answers. So now I want to turn it over to Senator Lugar for a brief statement, and then to Congressman Hamilton.
Well, thank you so very much, and what an honor it is to be here on campus once again with so many distinguished friends and with my dear friend Lee Hamilton. Let me, in these summary remarks, say that we had an election in the United States of America in which Donald Trump won the presidency. He had fewer votes than his Democratic Party opponent. He had a majority of the Electoral College, and he came into office with relatively little experience in foreign policy, many ideas about the world, and essentially began to go through a list of things that he felt were on the minds and hearts of so-called the Trump base that had elected him. This is often described as a group of Americans, 40 to 45%, who have very deep grievances about how life has been treating them, or how the country has been treating them. And Donald Trump spoke to them effectively. But as president, he then went ahead to say that we were going to build a wall against the Mexican border to keep out immigrants. And furthermore, by executive order, he tried to stop immigrants coming in almost immediately, overruled by the courts. He indicated in his first trip with regard to climate change that we would not be in part of the Paris Agreement. This is the agreement that encompasses almost every other country in the world concerned about the growth of CO2 and the warmth of the planet, and said simply we're not going to be a part of this. In part, some said this was because he was protecting coal miners and people dealing with CO2 type fuels in the United States. He indicated his first trip to NATO that he was tired of other countries not paying their fair share, that America could not bear the whole burden of defending Europe. This came as a shock that Article 5, which is usually mentioned, this is the proviso that if any nation in NATO is attacked, everybody else will come to the rescue. This was omitted altogether, leaving the impression that we might not come to the rescue for some reason. Closer to home, he indicated that we would not be interested in continuing the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, as it now stands. As a matter of fact, we are in negotiations. In fairness, this is the 7th round of that. So it has not been totally subordinated. It's of tremendous importance to Indiana farmers, I can say is one of them, that NAFTA happened. But nevertheless, this one likewise in limbo. The Pacific Trade Agreement that was about to commence, that would have in fact given the United States leadership in the Pacific Ocean in terms of trade as opposed to the Chinese. He indicated right off the bat we would not be a part of that at all, that was somebody else's business and we would not be involved. I go through this list of things simply to indicate that the president felt he was appealing, showing his base that he could in fact change life in America. He could change it really by executive order, not by acts of Congress repealing various memberships or affiliations and so forth. And in fact has continued to work with executive order because legislation has not been passed in almost any area. And we are in a situation presently in which, given the fact we do have a tax bill that was passed, we may have, if things happen for the good, something to do with immigration in the next couple of days or not, as the case may be. We have not either repealed Obamacare or done much to help, really, the situation of low-income Americans that have health problems. In essence, very little has occurred legislatively, and so this has left the president the field by diplomatic order. These are things that he wants to do. So we come tonight to discuss civility, how we begin to bring things along, and the facts are that the president still has retained substantial allegiance among the so-called Trump base. His overall approval ratings have declined, but the approval ratings of the Congress have declined even further among Democrats and Republicans. And therefore, the feelings about government generally, Americans, have been more and more dismal, as the case may be. We're going to be discussing tonight what, if anything, we can do about this. And I will throw out one suggestion. It's a modest one. In our Lugar Center, we established 5 years ago a think tank with former members of the Foreign Relations Committee staff and the Agriculture Committee staff, an office there in the Willard office building in Washington, D.C., where we're discussing and trying to move ahead on issues of arms control, food security around the world, and bipartisan politics. Now, with the food security situation, we're trying to rescue many of the foreign assistance programs that our government has been initiating and managed very well, with a lot of encouragement from the Gates Foundation and others to feed people around the world. We have tried to continue to work with my partner, Senator Sam Nunn, and the Nuclear Threat Initiative as new problems arise and with regard to arms control around the world. Since no progress is being made in our own country, no arms control treaty since 6 years ago, 2012, the New START Treaty. With the Bipartisan Index, we've published 3 of these now annually. We rate all the members of the Congress, the Senate from 1 to 100, the House from 1 to 435, on the basis of a member's ability to offer legislation that gains support from people on the other side of the aisle, or taking the initiative to look for legislation on the other side of the aisle and join up on it. And we rate all of the members. We publish these lists. They've had an impact in many parts of the country where states or localities are interested in how their member of the House or the Senate rates. As a matter of fact, some members who are rating fairly well point out in their biographical data that the Lugar Center rates them in this fashion. It's begun to create, at least with the help of Georgetown University, our partner in the statistics, a discussion of how you might begin to have the beginnings of some bipartisanship, some recognition of this, why there be some incentives for people to get involved in this sort of thing. It's a very modest beginning, but at least as we approach the subject tonight, this is one that will not easily be turned over. I'm grateful we're having this discussion, especially pleased of having it with Lee and with all of you, and we look forward to your questions and Lee's comments.
Congressman Hamilton.
I remember sitting in Meharry Hall, way up there, with a green beanie on my head. I was never allowed on the first floor back then, or second floor. I'm now sitting on the stage. I'm inclined to think my preference would be to sit up there. It's an extraordinary privilege to be at DePauw. And I want to say to Dr. McCoy and Mrs. McCoy how pleased Dick and I have been with the hospitality extended to us in recent hours. We've had an opportunity to meet with students and faculty, and it's been a terrific experience for Dick and me. I had the extraordinary privilege of working in the Congress with Dick for decades, really. He of one party and I of another. But in almost all of the foreign policy debates, because we're both internationalists, because we both believe strongly that America has an exceptional role to play in the world, we are on the same side of the issue. Dick is one of the iconic figures of Indiana politics. He served this state with extraordinary dedication and skill. And Dick, we're delighted to have you at DePauw, even though you come from that secondary school, Denison. I think representative democracy is a monumental achievement. I think it's one of the greatest achievements in the history of mankind. And you and I, every person in this room, are beneficiaries of those who preceded us and gave us this marvelous U.S. Constitution, Bill of Rights, and all of the institutions that have made our democracy the envy of the world. But representative democracy is under stress today. It is not performing as well as we would like. The American people, as Dick has alluded to, are unhappy with politicians, with politics, with our political institutions. They're discouraged. They see a lot of problems we're not dealing with effectively. And they want us to do better. Now, one thing I want to say, I got a lot of things to say about it, but I won't say them all now. Don't give up on the system. It's worked very well for 200 years, over. What's the alternative? The answer is there isn't any alternative. We've got to make this system work. Democracy is not a final achievement. It's not a product. It is a process by which we try to solve the problems that come after us. It was put together by a small group of men, all men, I believe, or almost all men. We were only a few million people. And here we are 250 years later, with all of our problems, the envy of the world. Dick and I have traveled a lot. We've been before all kinds of groups, and all of them envy us. But it is not a system that perpetuates itself. It depends on you, and it depends on me. It doesn't depend on George Washington anymore, or Abraham Lincoln. They had their shot. They did pretty well, didn't they? Now it's up to us. And to be blunt about it, Dick and I have pretty well run the course. We can spout off a little bit, give you some advice, which is about worth what you're paying for it. But we've already had our turn at the wheel, and many of you have too. But what brings us to the campus is the opportunity to see the people that will make this system work in the future. And it takes the very best that we've got. And DePauw will produce a lot of those people. Now, I think I was supposed to talk about civility, wasn't I?
Well, I have a question for you about that. What role?
Let me make one comment on it.
Okay.
The system doesn't work without civility.
That's true.
Doesn't work.
So
You just think about your own experience. Wherever you work, whether it's in the church or your profession or job, you can't get anything done without other people. You can't do it by yourself. I can't do it by myself. And the only way you can make this complicated country work is to work with others to improve our corner of the world. We can't solve all the problems, but we can make our home better, our neighborhood better, our town better, our county. And that's what's required of us. Whether this nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. That's it. That's the question. Lincoln asked it in 1863. That was the operational question. And it's in 1863, and it still is today. It's not written in the stars. It's not carved in Indiana limestone that will always be number one, the greatest in the world. It depends on you and me and American citizens. Go ahead with the question.
thank you.
Or I may want to say something else.
Now,
Go ahead.
My question is that I think over the last maybe 20 to 30 years around the country, we have starved the public school systems, which is where civic education begins. What do you think should be the role of a university who is getting students, and in my own experience here, students who unfortunately don't know a lot about the workings of government, although they're interested in it? How can the universities fill that gap? Because I don't know that we're going to get it in the public schools in many parts of the country.
Well, I think you're right. I don't know how much we require civic education today in the schools in Indiana.
One semester.
Well, that's what I was thinking, but I was afraid to say it.
I looked it up.
That's awful. Unless citizens understand how to be good citizens, voting, being informed, working with people of like mind, joining groups, talking to your representatives, improving your corner of the world. Unless you do the job of a citizen, the bleak future is in front of us. So what's the role of DePauw? What's the role of the 8th grader in the Greencastle public school system? I don't care whether it's a physics class or a biology class or a Shakespeare class. There has to come through to the students an obligation to accept the responsibilities of citizenship in this country. And being a citizen in a Republican form of government is a burden, and it's a substantial burden. But we have to step up and demand of ourselves performance as a citizen, demand of our political representatives that they put away the ideological speeches, that they emphasize that we're all in this together, that we can only make progress by a course of negotiation and compromise, and we have to search for a remedy for the problems that confront us. And that has to be done in an atmosphere of civility, for sure.
Senator Lugar?
I think a while back, the program, Leave No Child Behind, came to the fore because people asked the same question then, maybe 10 years ago. How prepared really are many students? Some are well prepared, come from fairly affluent school systems, have parents who are engaged in the community, but obviously many millions did not. And this was a real quest. I can remember going to conferences, bipartisan conferences of Senate members and House members sponsored by the Aspen Institute, in which we discussed this quite frankly, how the federal government could become involved with the local school situation. A lot of it required considerable money. There are many systems in our state as well as our country that are not properly financed currently. There aren't really enough teachers, quite apart from the development of curriculum. And that has become even more the case as we take a look at the situations around Indiana and elsewhere. But this is a dilemma now. Our federal government has just passed a budget. It does not do much for public education or for any education that I can see. Essentially, there are very important elements for military involved in this budget, and that's to the good in terms of our service personnel and our obligations there. But the facts of life are that most of the other social issues have seen those budgets cut. On top of that, the budget calls for spending of $1 trillion more than we're going to be taking in, adding to the trillions of dollars of debt our country now has, so that the remedies are less and less clear in the future. I think, this is an extremely important question as to how students at any level learn much more about our Constitution, about governance generally, how they participate in their school student bodies, running for office themselves, trying to take responsibilities, and trying to visit with those who have those responsibilities in state, local, or federal governments. And that's an obligation that's going to be very, very important if our question of civility tonight is to come to the fore and find a solution, because finding out how you bring about success in governance, how you gain majorities, how you visit with each other, how you even formulate good ideas is extremely important for our democracy, as Lee has expressed it, very important for the future of our republic.
So I don't think we can bypass the horrific events in Florida that occurred yesterday. That was the 8th school shooting this year that ended in death. So that's more than one a week. We're in the 7th week of the year. And the president said today that this was really a matter of mental health issues and making sure that people with mental problems don't get automatic weapons. And yet his budget proposal cuts services for mental health. And I think, that you wonder how in a civil society we can put an automatic weapon in the hand of any 19-year-old. And this is an intractable problem, I know, and it's a very unpopular topic, and everybody says it's not the time to talk the minute one of these events happens. But I wonder how you can mesh that issue with trying to reestablish civil society. I mean, you can't have a society where people are running around with guns and call it a civil society.
No, there will really have to be better thoughts about registration to begin with, quite apart from the mental stability of the people applying to begin with. But this is a very tough political problem because, as with many others, the National Rifle Association has sort of a scorecard for members of Congress as to how they vote on these issues. And any type of registration or something beyond where we are now is likely to gain a negative spot on that scorecard. In the past, citizens could weigh that, but now, given the unlimited amount of money that is available to spend in politics, a scorecard of that variety is likely to lead to a member of Congress who defies NRA in this case, or other people in other cases, as many millions of dollars of negative advertising in their congressional district or their state. As a result, members are very reticent to seek extermination that rapidly. And therefore, each of these situations becomes more and more delicate and difficult to solve. Until we are able to solve the problem of money in politics, we're going to have one problem after another, whether it's gun control or anything else, because there are people out there prepared really, as I say, to spend millions of dollars on an individual seat. And that the member feels, and this has led to a lack of activity in this area.
Congressman Hamilton?
If I announce my intent to run for Congress tonight,
Oh, yeah? That'd be great.
one of the first calls I would get, I can assure you, is from the NRA. And they would come to me and talk to me, and they want to know where I stand on the Second Amendment. And if my answers accorded with their views, they'd write a handsome check. Right now, those of you who don't agree with the NRA will advocate your view, but I doubt if I get any money from you. I'm not a rich man, and running for Congress is pretty doggone expensive. And if I want to get elected, I got to find money, and I got to find a lot of it. The average congressional district in Indiana, probably $7 million for sure, and maybe more. Senate, I don't know what it is, but it's a lot of money. Now, this is a very tough issue, and it's a tough issue in large part because of what Dick said about the influence of money in the process. I am, like Dick, deeply worried about the impact of money on representative democracy. It distorts the entire system. How do you do with this problem today, given the fact that the NRA is such a prominent player? Given the fact, I think I'm right in this, that the polls suggest overwhelmingly fairly tough restrictions on the availability of guns, but still we're not able to solve it. And the Indiana General Assembly right now is considering a bill to allow you to take a gun into church. Well, you do what you can within the system. You try to make the system work. If you are a person who thinks that gun ownership should be licensed, restrained in some way or other, you have to speak out. You have to work with your co-believers. You have to join forces with others. You have to contribute to political campaigns. And you have to say to every representative you can find, look, there are reasonable restraints that 60, 70, 80% of the American people can agree upon that should be enacted. Now, they're incremental steps. They're not going to take guns away from people. That's a bridge too far. You're not going to get there. So you have to work pragmatically as to what you can achieve. And the anti-NRA group voice can scarcely be heard. And that's why you see these extraordinary majorities that in the House and in the General Assembly that are racked up on bills favored by the NRA. Money talks, and it talks big time in American politics. That ought to make you feel good, huh?
Is it possible for the two sides to find a way to talk to each other in a civil way?
Why, of course it's possible. Not likely, but possible. So look, you have to insist, I have to insist, that our representatives speak to one another in a civil way. I told the story this afternoon. I had a friend get up on the floor of the House of the Representatives and give a speech. I agreed with most everything he said. I called him up afterwards, and I said, I think that was an awful speech. And it was an awful speech because he challenged the motivation of his adversary. He challenged the patriotism of his adversary. He challenged the intelligence, the ethics of his adversary. It was just awful. He didn't need to do that. And he lost a lot of support he should have had. Look, you know how to win friends and influence people. You know how to work within a group to make it function. Politics is no different. We have to tolerate one another. We have to understand their views. We have to listen to them. We have to see what the commonalities are, what the differences are, what problems cannot be solved, and there are a lot of them, and this may be one in the short term at least. But the only system we have is what we've got. And if you want change, you've got to figure out how you can make that system work for you. And fortunately, a lot of Americans over a period of many years have precisely figured that out. And because of it, our country can move forward.
How do you see the role of social media in contributing to the divisiveness in our society, and what can be done about that without impinging on the First Amendment? Senator Lugar?
Well, the social media covers a lot of things, but I would just say that there is a very important distinction between, let's say, major newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, or Wall Street Journal, major papers in Indiana. These are papers that are owned by stockholders, and they can be sued by people who feel injured by what is published in those papers. So if a reporter writes a story that is invalid or abusive, clearly the editor must call him in quickly and get that story turned around, because the paper is vulnerable. Now, in the case of the social media, there isn't the same vulnerability. Some of the material that appears on Facebook or whatever, really the author is not really clear. It's not clear who's responsible. It's often the case now, we are told, that even foreign governments sponsor stories. And so as a result, there isn't the same accountability, the same trust that has been basically a part really of our media system. Now, I think that's being spotted, and people are attempting to remedy the situation. The Facebook people, for example, Mark Zuckerberg has attempted to reform stories there, to edit the situation, to at least cut down the abuse that may be a part of it. But we're in a different ballgame. Great papers and even small papers have lost circulation, lost reporters and the amount of pages they have, lost the ability really to do investigative reporting, which is very important for all of us. Good reporters of that sort make a big difference in terms of our safety. And sometimes this is recovered by television networks, but sometimes not. It's a different type of media. But I would just say that at least in this particular area, there is a good bit of discussion among media people themselves, quite apart from the public, quite apart from people in public life who feel that they have been mishandled, and unfortunately so, and the remedies are not clear for them.
There isn't anybody in this room who knows less about the social media than me. I get all of my information from reading newspapers. That really makes me an oddball, doesn't it? I read newspapers. When social media first began, it was looked upon as a wonderful development for spreading information to people. The problem was a lot of people gave it fake information and distorted it. I believe social media, at least as I understand it, can be a tool, should be a tool for those of us who support rational public dialogue on the big issues of the day. And if we don't use it, we're passing by a big opportunity. Now, I'm not the person to tell you how to use it. The Russians have got that figured out. They use social media, cyber attacks, and all the rest to figure out how to undermine our election system, don't they? We got to figure out how to use the tool of social media, those of us who are right-minded about that, and that's everybody in this room, of course, how we can use social media to advance solutions to problems. You got all of these very tough problems out there, and people need more facts, they need more accuracy, they need more truth in order to make a good judgment about what to do about those problems. And social media has to be employed to get that job done.
How fragile do you see the judiciary system in the United States?
How what?
Fragile do you see the judiciary system in the United States, which has been under attack by the occupant of the White House, who talks about so-called judges and other pejorative comments. Is this a solid institution in this country? Can it remain solid even when it's under attack?
Well, as between the three branches of government, it's probably doing as well as any of the three, which isn't saying a lot. But the White House is not working very well. The Congress is not working very well. The federal judiciary is peopled by solid professional credentials. What worries me in the judicial branch today is politicalization. Not very long ago, several decades ago, a person selected to be a federal judge was a highly respected lawyer, was a Republican or a Democrat, but once they put on the black robe, they analyze problems differently than a politician, and I believe earn the respect that they had in many ways. Now, what has happened, we have politicized the appointment process. So Mr. Trump, for example, has appointed a large number of judges who do not receive the highest ratings of the American Bar Association, who are ideologues and not highly respected lawyers. We have the election of judges, which is an abomination, in my view. Not exactly an applause line, is it? Huh? I really have doubts about the election of judges.
And
really
that goes on at the state level, not on the federal
at
level.
any level.
Right.
I really have doubts. Today, a federal judge is appointed. Of course.
Right.
And that's a different issue, and I probably should have kept my mouth shut there. I
It's
don't
too
know.
late.
Too late now. But anyway, let's oppose the politicalization of judges. And anything that encourages that or leads to it, I think, is detrimental to the judiciary branch.
Senator
Let me
Lugar?
just add
Yeah,
that
please do.
clearly we're in a situation that is in flux. President Trump has been stymied on many occasions, particularly in the immigration issues, for instance, by judicial mandates that simply stopped whatever he wanted to do. And that's occurred in some other areas, but the immigration thing has been most conspicuous. Nevertheless, it's not just the people in the press and in the legal system, but they see, starting with the Supreme Court, the age of some of the justices, begin to calculate how long it will be that they will be able to serve, and what kind of appointees the president might make, based on the kind of appointments he's been making in other courts. And this has led to a great deal of anxiety. One of the situations that could change, at least with the presidency, is that he uses executive orders. They're frequently stymied by the judiciary currently in America. This is the check and balance is not with the Congress. This is a sort of a forward pass over to Congress altogether, but the judiciary. Part of the interesting part of this is that there are all sorts of vacancies all over the country in the judicial system. The administration has not been particularly efficient in nominating people. The number of these appointments is still out there in very, very large numbers. And the Congress has not been particularly swift in giving confirmation, in part because they're not there that often, and there are just not that many days in the week to have these hearings and to move on with it. But I'm concerned about this. I think this is an area that is in flow, but not in a healthy way. And so as a respect, by many people are encouraging Justice Ginsburg to hang on, to do so indefinitely. And that would be true really of other judges that are conspicuous in this respect.
Yeah. I'd like to open the panel now up to questions from the audience. There are 2 mics up here. You can come to the mics if you'd be nice enough to identify yourself. We would appreciate that. And this is being live streamed. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. So this is a very public event. Do you want to go first, Professor Klinger?
Hi, my name is Jeff Klinger. I'm a professor of communication at DePauw. I'm also a proud DePauw alum, class of 1988. We had the privilege of having a debate a few years back between Karl Rove and the outspoken governor of Vermont, Howard Dean. And I'm going to ask you a variation of the question that I asked them. It strikes many of us that both political parties have lost their way. President Bush's war on terrorism, President Trump's building a wall with Mexico, hardly seems like, since you raised the ghost of Abraham Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation. On the other hand, the Cash for Clunkers program and the targeted drone killing of foreign nationals and US citizens hardly seem like the New Deal. And I wonder what your thoughts are on the state of your political parties and how we can turn them back to their original founding ideals.
I don't know anybody who is going to be able to reform either of our two political parties. I suspect right now they are fractionated in various pieces. Sometimes this is most apparent in Congress, where the Freedom Caucus, for example, in the House moves away from Speaker Ryan or various other parts of the House situation. There have been similar groups in the Senate. These are deliberate attempts on the part of people to stymie legislation and to make things more difficult for the leadership. And so for the moment, the leadership is barely trying to hang on and to try to deal with the president as well as with each other. I wish we were at a point in which people were having conferences in the Senate or the House on reform, how we in fact could strengthen our bodies, both in terms of the political parties as well as procedure. But this is simply not one of these times. We're really moving toward fractionalization as opposed to any degree of unity. The major effect of this, of course, means that when I came into the Senate, we had 13 authorization bills. For instance, in the Agriculture Committee, we'd have a bill in which we would discuss things that ought to be funded as a part of the Farm Bill or an interim situation. Then would come along an appropriation bill for agriculture. There would be 13 of these. And at the end of all of this, we would then have formulated a budget made up of 13 appropriation bills for each of the major sectors of government. Now, in recent years, there are almost no authorization bills. And as a result, the members on the committee have very little to say about anything that's going to occur in terms of expenditure of money in the fields for which they're responsible. They spend less and less time in terms of public hearings, listening to others of Americans who might be testifying. And as a result, we have a situation in which we have sort of broken down the system, and the members have no chance then to have floor debate, to make amendments in behalf of their constituents. At the end of the trail, maybe we'll have a defense bill that's on authorization or an appropriation, occasionally something for veterans perhaps. But we then pass a continuing resolution. We kick the can down the road for another year and say the budget we passed last year is the same one that we will pass this year. And members try to add amendments at the last to slip something into that. This has changed the whole outlook of the participation by rank and file members in their committees, as well as the work in the Congress as a whole. And it's something that is maybe not noted by the public, but should be, and certainly by those who are advocating reform in the Congress.
Congressman
The
Hamilton.
United States of America, the world's greatest democracy, cannot pass a budget.
True.
That's where we are. We cannot pass a budget. What Dick referred to a moment ago, the last time, Dick, we handled all 12 appropriation bills, giving members an opportunity to offer amendments, to vote up or down on the amendments on all 12 bills was 1995. Since that time, we've used the omnibus bill and the continuing resolution, which really are abominations, if I may quote myself. A bill comes out of the United States Appropriations Committee in the House or the Senate. It's decided not by members of Congress as to what's in that bill, but by staff and leadership alone. They make a decision at 3 in the morning. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the bill comes out to the floor of the House. One vote, no amendments, up or down, $1 trillion budget. It is an absolute absurdity and an outrage that we can't handle a budget in the United States government.
So what's the solution?
Now hold it,
What's the solution?
I didn't answer the question.
That's true.
I agree with the question. I said earlier on that people are disappointed with political institutions. I think that's obvious. I cited the Congress and the White House and so forth, but it applies to the political parties as well. Now, I can sit there all night and tell you what's wrong with the Republican Party. But let me tell you, I got a lot of problems with the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has become obsessed with criticizing Donald Trump. I'm tired of listening to it. Have you seen all these Democratic pundits writing? They're just seeing who can outdo the other in criticizing Trump. Okay, I got the message. I want to know what the Democratic Party stands for, how they're going to solve the problem of climate change, what they're going to do in this country about the maldistribution of wealth and income, what they believe the role of the United States should be in the world, and on and on and on. I'd like to see the Democratic Party addressing these issues, and they're not doing it. It's become a party that is not working. I agree with you. What do you do about it? Well, the parties are the parties. They're disappointing to us now, I think. But if they're going to be revived, they have to be revived by the citizens of the United States and the people sitting in front of me. That's the way you revive institutions, citizen action, which I still believe in. Oh, it doesn't work all the time.
Thanks.
Oh,
You know,
Can
one
you
of the...
identify yourself?
Sure will. I'm Chris Johnston, 1983, DePauw alumnus. One of the first things I learned in a civics class in middle school was about Unigov. And the architect of that is here. You should have a pop quiz about that tomorrow morning, Bruce. It's probably one of the most significant things that I think you did in your career and still has effects today. Representative Hamilton, when you were, I think you were a Kappa waiter?
a what?
Were you a waiter at Kappa when you were here? Is that right?
Was I what?
You were a waiter at a sorority when you were, wasn't
I
it?
was.
Kappa?
Kappa Gamma.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Want to make sure that's clear. Everybody understood that?
I wouldn't have had a solid meal during my 4 years at DePauw if it hadn't
Yep.
been for the Kappa Gamma.
That's right. I'm a student of history. That's an important byline of you. But, sir, when you were here, too, you also had chapel at
We did.
Gobin every Wednesday.
Required.
Do you think in the topic tonight of civil discourse that God and faith, as we become so much more secular in our society, has some impact? In fact, rejection of God and faith in most of our society, and much of it, has some impact on civil discourse.
Well, yes, I do. I think there is and should be a close relation between faith and politics, and not everybody agrees with that. I want to see the Christian conscience, or Jewish, or Muslim conscience, wrestling with the great policy issues of the day. I want to hear what the Pope has to say about these issues. I happen to be a backsliding Methodist with a very heavy emphasis on backsliding. But I like to know what the position of the Methodist Church is on big public issues, and I want to hear them address those issues. I do not agree with people who want to shut the church, however defined up, and not speak out on these issues. I want to hear the Christian, the Jewish voice speak up. I think it's an important voice to hear. Now, a lot of people don't agree with that, and I have to respect that. And they see getting involved in politics as being too messy, ethically speaking. Incidentally, going back to the question on parties, how did I get off on that? I think the parties have become captured by the extremes. Extreme left, more in the Democratic Party, extreme right, more in the Republican Party, and what's missing is the center, however defined. Well, that's an addendum to my previous comment. I don't know if you can keep track of all of this, can you? I can't keep track of it up here.
Senator Lugar, would you care to answer the question about faith and politics?
I agree with Lee's comment before he got back into his other.
Yeah. Before I got off the track.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Marko Mavrovic. I'm a DePauw student. I'm also the future of the Republican Party for those interested. Thank you. Yes. So my question is, the office of President of the United States occupies a very interesting space in politics. It's unique. The office holder is both the head of state, representing the entire country, and the head of government, representing a very particular set of political agendas and beliefs. How do we, in the age of Trump, give the office its proper due deference and respect when the office holder may not be deserving of that deference and respect?
Well, it is a hard question. I believe we need to respect the office of President of the United States. If Mr. Trump, whom I do not support, walked into this room today, I would stand. If I went to the White House, I would greet him with respect, because he is the President of the United States, and he was elected by the people of the United States according to our processes. Having said that, I believe it is my obligation and my duty, if I disagree with the President, to let him know, and why. Do it respectfully, courteously, but do it. I often confronted this question, and Dick has too, I'm sure. We would meet with presidents regularly. I've worked with 9 presidents. I didn't agree with any of them 100% of the time. And they certainly didn't agree with me. But I always felt that I, as a representative, had the obligation to say, Mr. President, this is the way I think we should proceed on the problem. And I will say, every president that I encountered listened respectfully and civilly. I was encouraged by that. And I don't ever remember being dismissed summarily by a president. Speak up, speak your mind, but do it courteously. Courtesy is contagious. Civility is contagious. It's pretty hard to get mad at somebody who smiles at you.
I think Lee has stated it well.
You're putting a lot of pressure on me, Dick.
Would not be the first time.
My name is Robert Calvert. I'm a retired professor of political science. When I graduated from high school in 1952, went on to college, I learned that we Americans, including our politicians, were sharing a lot together, that when they disputed with one another, they were functioning within what was called a consensus. Now, today, I understand, I heard someone say this, that it's hard to find Republicans and Democrats today who will agree on what the day of the week is. So I'm wondering, what happened to that consensus? Why in the 70 years since then has it disappeared? Why do Americans, especially American politicians, not share any basic assumptions that they can draw upon in mounting their arguments?
I think that many majority of people in politics, in fact, do visit with each other, have an understanding what is being said. In other words, I'm not totally pessimistic that the body politic is failing altogether, but I think the facts are that many people who have conspicuous leadership positions are making it very difficult to reach decisions. And so the conversation may be occurring among the rank and file. There may be respect at that level, but at the same time, this is not enough really to move the system in a way that is conspicuous. I would say even currently that there's been a great deal of cooperation in recent days between the majority leaders of the House and the Senate, as well as the opposition people there, to attempt to find on immigration, for example, the debate that's going on now and has really is tough going. But the fact is that there are many members who are attempting to find solutions. And they may not be successful, but I'm optimistic at least that there are still some who are listening and who are participating and reciprocating back and forth.
Look, I think the world has become a lot more complicated. There are a lot more actors. There's a lot more intensity. I don't know whether I mentioned to this group when I went to college, there were 130 million people in the country. Today, 320. But more than that, the variety differences in the country have exploded. And when you have more people and more difficult issues, the issues coming at you with great complexity and rapidity, you don't solve a lot of them, tensions rise. Politics has become a much more intense game. More is at stake. I used to ask myself, why did the CEO of America's top 500 companies come around and walk on through the halls in the Rayburn building and come to my office? Now, these are important people. They're very important to the world and to the country. They got a lot of things to do. They got a lot of decisions to make. And here they come knocking on Lee Hamilton's door. Why? because what we decided in the Congress could have a huge impact on their enterprise. And with a shift of a comma or a phrase, it could mean hundreds of millions of dollars difference to their enterprises. You got a lot more at stake today. You've got a media that Dick was referring to earlier that exacerbates the differences among us. You've got an electorate that is evenly divided in the country. You've got 20,000 interest groups with offices in Washington, D.C. Every one of them with a lot of money in their pocket to spend to achieve goals that they think desirable for the country and for their enterprise. You put all of this together and you've got a hot spot.
Over here.
And that's why things have gotten so much more difficult.
Hi, Matt Cummings. I'm the director of our social justice office here. Senator Lugar, I remember my mom dragging me to the polls as a teenager as she voted for you, and I know if she was here today, she'd be happy to see you. I have a question around civic action. Here at DePauw, we often have civic action days where we encourage students to contact their legislators and talk to them about issues that are important to them. A lot of times students are contacting, or we ourselves are contacting our legislators and asking them to take action on an issue that they usually will vote against. And so I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on what are some advice you have for contacting our legislative leaders and asking them to vote in a different way in which they normally don't vote in that way. How can we ask for change in ways in which, the person in power often doesn't go towards that way? I'd be curious to hear both your thoughts.
Well, I think the point is that you can ask the legislator to take a different point of view, whether it's a talented student or faculty member or a citizen in this group. You need to offer some good reasons why the legislator ought to change his or her mind. In other words, the fact that you're weighing in as one vote is important, but if there is to be really a change of heart and mind, there needs to be good reason, and that these reasons can be expressed in a very civil and thoughtful way, given whatever research you have done on the subject, or at least some point of view that the legislator might not be conscious of.
Voted against them. Now look, most legislators will listen pretty carefully to you. And if you want to try to change their mind on something, you've got a burden of persuasion. You've got to be nice about it. You've got to understand what your representative thinks, why he thinks that way, and why he votes that way. And then sit down and figure out, how do I counter that in a way that will be persuasive to him or to her? Your chances probably are not better than 50%, maybe much less, of changing his mind or her mind. But it's worth a shot. He or she is entitled to their opinion. They're the representative. And if you don't like them, you vote against them.
Yeah, I'm Nathan Reed. I'm a senior political science Middle Eastern studies major. So my question's shifting from the domestic sphere to more of a foreign policy one. With the rise of especially Russia and China and the decrease of American presence in the global sphere, what effects do you think that will have on the institutions the U.S. has set up, especially like the UN, World Bank, IMF, things like that, especially since Chinese and the Russians are doing similar things now, or trying to?
Can you sort of reframe that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess with the rise of Russia and China in the global sphere, and the American presence decreasing.
Yeah, the decline of the American presence and the rise of Russia and China to fill the gap.
What will happen to institutions like the UN, World Bank, and IMF?
Yeah, and how does that affect?
Well, look, it's a fact that our position in the world is not what it once was. We were, for a long time after World War II, the dominant voice in world affairs. Dominant. And whatever we said really counted. It is less of a voice today, no doubt about it. You can see all kinds of negotiations taking place almost every day, and we're not involved, like we certainly would have been some years ago. That doesn't mean we're an insignificant player. We're still the most important voice in the world, but we're not as dominant as we once were. China is the obvious answer, obvious illustration of an emerging power. We shouldn't oppose Chinese participation in world affairs. We can't stop them. We want to make them move in the direction of the international world order, for want of a better term. So we have to work with them. On some things, the United States and China just will not agree. We're not going to agree with them on it. But there are large areas where we can agree with them. So what you have to try to do is not solve the relationship. You can't do that. You have to manage it. You have to work with them where there are commonalities of cooperation can work. You have to accept the fact that their view of the South China Sea and our view are going to be very different, and we're not going to resolve them. And make sure that you avoid war. The worst thing that could happen is to go to war. Then you'd have big time problems. So manage the relationship, make progress where you can, accept the fact that you can't make progress everywhere. The same thing can be said of Russia and almost any other relationship. These are difficult problems, the relationship between these big powers.
I think that with the case of China, if we got back into the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we would play a very different role in the Pacific with regard to trade. That would have very constructive ramifications in terms of our relationship with China, as with other trade issues we have. I think those are soluble. I think we need to consider, and this is a situation that has not been studied as carefully as it ought to be, but think through with the Russians once again various arms control thoughts. Now, what's occurring in our own government now is the thought that we ought to create some additional nuclear weapons, small weapons they're called, or take other situations of that variety and move around what used to be the large weapons that we were controlling and working with the Russians to resolve that. This is a serious, it's a very sophisticated problem, but one that is important, I believe, for us and for Russia, really, the relationship, as well as the rest of the world down the trail. Because the two of us still have the power with 1,550 warheads, more or less, to blow up the world. It's a horrible situation still, and one that has been pretty quiet for the last 6 years. And there has been no movement by any administration or the Congress to move, but I think it's something we need to think about.
We'll take these last two questions. Over here.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Keller. I work with our Media Fellows program here. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, who are our modern day prophets in terms of civility?
Prophets?
Yeah.
Prophets.
Prophets.
Huh?
Prophets.
Isaiah? He's not so bad.
Who's the modern day Isaiah?
Who's
Come
the
let
modern
us
day-
reason. Well, I'll let Dick answer the modern.
Well, I think I'd have to think about that.
Okay. Professor Gelman.
Hi, David Gelman. I teach history at DePauw. Can you each give an example from your congressional careers where you changed your mind on an issue as a result of either citizen calls or civil discourse or something that happened in a committee room that made you, over time, change your position? Because ultimately, the civil discourse doesn't matter if people don't move in surprising and interesting ways. So it'd be interesting to hear a concrete example from your careers as legislators.
I was chairman of the Agriculture Committee. I listened a great deal to farmers in Indiana. I am a farmer in Indiana with 604 acres in Marion County, and corn and soybeans and hardwood trees, and that's been a tradition in the family. But farm bills are very complex, and therefore none of us are going to be involved in each aspect of agriculture in our own states, quite apart from in all the states of the country. And so I took very seriously visits by members of Farm Bureau or other groups around the country, or individual people from Indiana that I respected in the agricultural realm, as we tried to formulate farm bills or legislation each year in the appropriations process. And I profited a great deal from that council.
I can remember a senator from Georgia, Sam Nunn, and a senator from Indiana, Dick Lugar, coming to me and say, "Lee, would you vote to subsidize the Soviet Union?" And I said, "Are you out of your mind? Why should I give a dime to the commies?" That was my point of view. I didn't think I was irrational. I thought I was pretty sensible on it. But Dick and Sam persuaded me that if that money reduced nuclear weapons in the Soviet Union, it was worth subsidizing. That's how persuasive this guy is, see? And, but look, I cast 14,000 votes. Looking back on them, I don't agree with all of them myself. I change my mind frequently. I can give you 12,000 more examples if you want.
Well, thank you both very much for this very enlightening and engaging conversation here at DePauw University, and thanks to our audience. And we look forward to having you here again. Thanks so much.